Object 07/493 was first spotted just beyond Jupiter's orbit by the Space Guard program. At first, it was projected to pass millions of miles outside of Earth's orbit. However, we soon discovered that the object was not following a gravitationally free fall trajectory. As such, its path was recalculated.
The Day the Earth Stood Still is the story about our interaction with a completely different species from a different star system. And you know, that sounds kind of fanciful. That's just the fictional setting of, if you will, a moral lesson about how to behave toward your own planet. But I think there's more to it than that, because now, since we are possibly on the brink of actually establishing some sort of information exchange with other worlds, this is a very contemporary issue.
Over the millennia, we've come to think of ourselves as the only creation, the only place in the universe that life might exist. Now we've moved out into our solar system a little bit. We have the technology now to look for life on other worlds. It's part of our nature, I think, to try to figure these things out, part of our curiosity.
Are we alone? Is there someone else out there? It's one of the great profound questions of our civilization. So it's worth investing something to try to figure out if they're out there.
You know, the number of planets that are out there in the part of the universe we can see with our telescopes is greater than the number of grains of sand on all the beaches of the Earth. That's such an enormous number that it seems to me highly reasonable to expect not only that there's life out there, but that there's a lot of intelligent life.
Now, whether that's a radio communication, an optical communication, or whether it's actually finding, microorganisms on Mars, I don't know. I think all are possible, but all are tricky. And it's a heck of a big haystack to search for the needle, but we have to look.
There's a rule of thumb in science that nothing ever happens only once. So if that thing is life-forming or intelligent life-forming, then it probably happens more than once.
Life is a chemical process. It's water to act as a solvent, to break apart organic compounds that are made around a carbon atom. The only other thing you need for life is an energy source. On Earth, we use sunlight. So liquid water, organic compounds, an energy source, that's the recipe for life. And there's probably a good chance that this chemistry has repeated itself somewhere else.
Which of these three would most likely survive in the extreme environment of the Jupiter moon Callisto?
One of the complications in trying to understand life on other planets is that every planet is different. So we think that we know life and would recognize it if it bumped into us. But when we're asking, could this different environment in the universe harbor life, then we have to be a little bit more careful, because it might not be the kind of life that we're used to seeing here on Earth.
In that case, you could be looking for microbes on Mars, which is what NASA's doing right now. It's the obvious target for searching for maybe traces of past life.
In the past history of Mars, we see evidence, for example, from the Mars exploration rovers, that you did have some standing water, or possibly on the subsurface, you had this key liquid water. So you'll start getting more and more missions that will have some chance of finding evidence of past life, or fossil life, or even present life. That's certainly one of the main themes of Mars exploration right now.
So we're looking at Mars, but then there's moons of planets. There's moons of Jupiter and moons of Saturn where you could imagine looking. And these moons are smaller than the Earth, but not completely dissimilar in size.
Me personally, if I was going to go looking somewhere in our solar system, I'd look on Europa, which is a moon of Jupiter. It's entirely covered by ice, but we are almost certain that underneath that ice is a global ocean. It's a water planet, much like our Earth. And so the trick will be, it's in probably the nastiest radiation environment in our solar system, around Jupiter, and then you would have to drill through the ice.
One possible route to finding out is to build a spaceship, to build a mission that would go and actually land on the surface of this moon and poke around like we've done on Mars. But that's very expensive. So what people do is they reproduce the conditions we think exist on Europa here in our laboratories, here on Earth. And then they poke at them. They fire lightning into them and they shake them up and they have volcanoes and so forth. And they ask, what happens? Are there interesting things going on in terms of the chemistry that would be worth our while to go visit? And I don't know the answer yet. This is the kind of thing we're going to have to figure out.
Do you represent a civilization?
I represent a group of civilizations.
Our searches so far look in our neighborhood, which is still an awfully big neighborhood. And what we're finding is a lot of systems that might lead to having other planets in them that might be friendlier to life.
People around the world are looking for what we call extrasolar planets, which would be planets around other stars. Back a couple decades ago, none had been discovered. It might have been that our solar system was it. But then the technology advanced. First, the first one was discovered, then the second, and then they started coming in droves. And now it's reaching the point where you could take a photo of a planet, but still you're only going to get a little tiny dot, and you aren't going to be able to tell much about it. So there are plans for bigger telescopes.
The Kepler mission is a new kind of telescope. It'll be launched up into space in 2009, I believe. And it turns out that the Kepler mission would be able to find worlds as small as the Earth or Mars, or maybe even a little bit smaller. Also, NASA and other space agencies in Europe and elsewhere are planning to build big telescopes like the Terrestrial Planet Finder that would be able, if you will, to sniff the atmospheres of worlds around other stars and tell us, you know, we don't know what it is, but there's something there that's alive. So within a couple of years, we will know whether, in fact, the kind of world we live on here is really some sort of miracle, you know, 1 in a billion shot, or whether planets like the Earth are as common as cheap motels.
So what people call the holy grail of the extrasolar planet search is that Earth-like planet, where water can exist as a liquid. Because Earth happened to fall into that temperature range is why we're here. And so finding that planet is what everybody's trying to do.
There are other ways to find life in space. My day job is to look for not just any sort of life in space, it's to look for the intelligent variety, the kind of life represented by Klaatu in this film.
What were you before you were human?
Different.
Now, SETI is a generic acronym standing for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. We use big antennas and we try and eavesdrop on radio broadcasts that might be coming from some other world, signals that might be sent our way, either deliberately because they're trying to get in touch or just sort of leaking off their planet the way our radar signals and our television leak off ours.
There are a few efforts underway. The SETI Institute has got a big Allen array that they hope to come online soon. It will be a giant array of small radio telescopes that work together. And then there are astronomers at the University of California at Berkeley that use the Arecibo radio telescope in Puerto Rico, which is the largest radio telescope on Earth. And they're looking too.
Traditional SETI has been done using radio wave searches, but now, more recently, we're able to look for what's called optical SETI, which is basically looking for visible light, just like lasers that may be hundreds of light years away. It sounds kind of outrageous at first, but it turns out if we took the world's largest current laser and used it to beam a signal, it would actually outshine our sun as seen from outside our solar system, so presumably alien civilizations could easily outshine their parent stars.
The project I've been closest to over the years is called SETI at Home. It is an experiment in what they call distributed computing, where they take the data collected by the Arecibo radio telescope and they parcel it out over the internet to people sitting at home on their personal computers. And they actually process the real scientific data. It's like building a virtual supercomputer. People around the world participate in this project, and it gives them a chance to really do science, which is what I find personally exciting about it.
Although there have been several detections, none of them have ever met the test of follow-up. So there's never been a signal that's been seen that hasn't been either disproved, which is what happens in most cases, that it's some type of interference, or something that you just never see in any repeatability.
There's only one signal. It's called the WOW signal that was observed, I think back in the 1970s at Ohio State University had a SETI program. And that one had all the characteristics of a radio signal, but it never recurred. That's, part of the tragedy of it. It might have been a genuine signal, but we don't know. And unless you can go back and re-observe and get it to repeat itself, you can't claim that you've discovered anything.
Can you explain any of this?
If we were, for example, to find a signal with our SETI experiments, should we talk back? Most people say, yeah, sure, let's send them some messages. Let's find out what they're like. In reality, it might be very hard to do that because any aliens we find via, eavesdropping experiments are likely to be hundreds, maybe thousands of light years away. Now, that's a very, very long distance. And what it means is that if you start talking, it might take hundreds or thousands of years for your message to get there and another couple of hundred or a couple of thousand years for their response to get back. So it's really a slow conversation. There are people who use methods other than those used by, for example, the SETI experiments to try and establish whether there's any intelligence out there. Now, one thing you can do, obviously, is to investigate reports that that the aliens are here, that they're, flying their saucers around, or people see things in the sky. Could that be an extraterrestrial presence? There's been a lot of that, and it's certainly worth looking at. I mean, what could be more interesting than learning that they're here?
When I started work at the Ministry of Defence, I had no interest in UFOs. I knew nothing about the subject. I certainly had no belief in extraterrestrials. Having done that job, and I say this because, of course, I've spoken to astronomers and various other scientists, I'm convinced that there is life out there in the universe.
Jimmy Carter, while he was running for governor of Georgia in 1969, actually had his own UFO experience in the company of 10 or so members of the Leary, Georgia Lions Club. And a UFO, which he describes as large as the moon, appeared to all of them. And it was a transformational experience for him. So in the 1976 presidential campaign, Carter says, if I'm elected president, I will open up all the extraterrestrial, ET, and UFO files. The goals of the Carter White House study was, for the first time in history, to bring out all of the evidence which then existed, which had really been suppressed.
The day-to-day business of running the British UFO research effort was a number of different things. First and foremost, it was investigating new sightings that were reported from members of the public, from police officers, pilots, military personnel, whoever. But there was also policy work, research, for example, looking into geographical groupings, trend analysis, to see if we could find any patterns that might help us determine what on earth was going on. I think the case that interested me most was one from 1993, where a UFO for a period of about 6 hours flew over large parts of the United Kingdom, including over 2 military bases. Witnesses included numerous police officers and Air Force personnel. And one of these Air Force officers described to me this vast triangular-shaped craft flying slowly over the base, firing a narrow beam of light down at the ground, emitting a low-frequency humming sound, and then, in an instant, shooting away to the horizon many times faster than a military jet. There seems to be some evidence that on this night, an unidentified object or objects was flying over the United Kingdom.
A different context would be, before we say something is out of this world, extraterrestrial, let's first make sure that it's not in this world, terrestrial. And do we really know enough about any given sighting that we can discount all terrestrial natural explanations and say, okay, it must be something supernatural or extraterrestrial or out of this world?
I get a phone call about once every 2 weeks from somebody who's having difficulties with extraterrestrials, with aliens that have come to Earth, apparently. And I must say that these people, they're not making up stories, right? I mean, you can tell from the tone of their voice and what they're saying, this isn't a hoax. They actually have seen something or experienced something that for them is very real. Is it something psychological or is it really aliens? Well, since we know about psychology, we don't know about aliens visiting, you have to go for option number one, unless they have some very compelling evidence. If they can say, hey, not only was I probed, but here's the probe, I was able to grab one off the table before I left, and you looked at that thing and you say, well, You know, this is not something made here on Earth. I mean, that kind of evidence, of course, would carry a lot of weight.
It's good to remember that a UFO technically is just that. It's just an unidentified flying object. It doesn't make it extraterrestrial. If we get media calls and calls from the general public saying there's been a sighting, usually the first thing I do is find out if there's an Air Force base nearby, and inevitably there almost always is. So probably what most people see when they think they see a UFO is just a jet.
A most recent example that I think can be explained away as a military craft was that on January 8th, 2008, we had a sighting in Stephenville, Texas. Here you have a craft that overflew the Texas White House unopposed. Well, our investigation is that no, that's not an extraterrestrial craft. It's kind of a metal craft.
Most of the UFO sightings that I investigated turned out to have a conventional explanation. They were misidentifications of something perfectly ordinary. But it was around about 5% that we couldn't explain, and which turned out to be something perhaps truly extraordinary. What they were, we didn't know. We shouldn't dismiss them without undertaking some sort of proper scientific investigations.
Question I get asked a lot is, if you find a signal, you know, what do you do next? There is protocol, and these protocols were written during the Cold War when the Soviet Union and the United States, for example, were heavily engaged in doing these kinds of experiments. And really the purpose of these things was to ensure openness. That is to say, if anybody finds a signal, you know, don't keep it covered up. Make it publicly known to the scientific community so that everybody with a telescope can start looking in that part of the sky, of course. And the other thing is, you know, do good science, verify it. Don't, you know, cry wolf by saying, we found a signal, and then 2 weeks later say, well, actually, you know, it was just a, you know, an undergraduate prank from the local college.
There's an organization called the Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams. Telegrams tells you how long this facility's been around because nobody uses telegrams anymore. But that's a clearinghouse. When astronomers discover, say, a new asteroid or comet in the sky, they notify this bureau, and they send out the message to other scientists to confirm the results. Also, they will notify the Secretary General of the UN. Then, what do? Do we try to communicate back? That protocol is not so well worked out. It's going under the principle of think before you speak.
People who find the signal will not respond without some sort of international consultation. So you don't have to worry that if some other country finds a signal that they're going to get into a private conversation with ET. But our protocols for deciding what to do in case we get a signal are, in fact, not under the force of any law. It isn't that the United Nations can enforce these things. It's sort of an informal agreement among the people that are actually trying to find extraterrestrial signals. That's a very small group of people, by the way.
Intriguingly, there is no protocol, certainly so far as I'm aware of in the United Kingdom, for a UFO crash. So there is no military standard operating procedure that could be very quickly brought into play. And of course, I think that's a mistake. You need to have a plan, however unlikely you think the scenario is. And then if that becomes a reality, you at least know who to call, what resources to deploy, etc.
History has lessons to teach us about first encounters between civilizations. As a rule, the less advanced civilization is either exterminated or enslaved. Unfortunately, in this case, the less advanced civilization is us.
Our entire history, we've been the dominant species. We've been the only intelligent species. And to actually discover that not only we're not alone, but if it's an actual SETI signal, that there are other intelligent beings out there, I think the philosophical impacts will be profound.
I hope that it would make people perhaps be less concerned with issues of race, religion, nationality, politics, and that it might draw us together and make us think we are citizens of planet Earth, and so we must deal with these other people, whoever they may be, as citizens of Earth.
It may well be that the first response is fear. I think instinctively, you know, that animal part of us is going to think, wow, they could destroy us.
On the day the Earth stood still, of course, what's the first thing they do? The authorities shoot the alien. I mean, that is kind of the default thing with people. We don't trust people from other groups. We like to think that we're educating ourselves out of those tribal instincts, but not that confident yet.
If we get past that first instinctive knee-jerk response, I think it will be replaced by curiosity. And we'll want to communicate with them. We'll want to know if they have any advanced technology that they can teach us. Maybe we can make life on Earth better based on what we can learn. So it's going to be a complex response if we ever do find them.
You know, we tend to be so Earth-oriented and focused on the planet. Well, just for a moment, step back and start looking at the pictures of Earth from space, and you begin to understand we are this small spaceship in this wider universe.
Sometimes I'm asked, occasionally by my own mother, so what's the point, right? You're out there looking for something that may or may not show up. You're looking for a signal that would tell you that somebody's on a world 700 light years away. Who cares? And I think the answer to that is that in some level, we all care, because we all are interested to know if what is happening on this planet is somehow extraordinary, or is it very commonplace? I mean, that would give us some sort of insight into our own importance. And so, to me, it's not about learning whatever it is that the aliens have to tell us. To me, the really important question that would be answered right away is what happened here, the development not only of life, but intelligent life, able to understand the cosmos, that's happened in many places. That'd be interesting to know.
I think that people are just naturally curious. Until we beat out the curiosity from them by giving them bad physics courses in high school, people are curious about the universe. They want to know where they came from and what the universe is made of. Could there be life on other stars around other galaxies and so forth? You don't need to be a professional physicist or astronomer to be interested in these questions, because they're basic questions that we all share.
I'd be surprised if in my lifetime they make contact, but I think there is hope for making contact, and we should keep searching.
Our searches are always getting better. We have new types of systems coming online, and we're just getting to the forefront of getting real astrobiology instruments on board spacecraft that are going to be going especially to Mars, and start looking for the building blocks of life. Now, will they find it? Well, it depends on whether it's there and we happen to look in the right place. But at least the techniques are getting better and better, and so there's an interesting future to look forward to.
The universe wastes nothing. Everything is simply transformed.
I think it is an extraordinarily romantic and exciting endeavor, because after all, there have been 10,000 generations of Homo sapiens before me, and probably members of each one of those generations wondered if there was something out there in the sky that was as clever as they are. And now finally we have the technology to look, and gosh, isn't that exciting? I think it's very exciting.